So let's record that. And I'd like to also, okay, so this is what I'd like to cover. What I'm doing for support next week, because the lectures, practicals all finished this week, but your deadline is next Friday and you've had IT disruption. So what I'm going to do, I'll explain what I've set up, talk about the tech report, the video, and this question here, which is cropping up a lot at the moment, inevitably, because some of you are coming to the coursework very late after sorting out lots of other stuff, and it's a stressful time. So let's see if I can get through that in between all your questions and your anything you throw in the mix as well. Okay, so very first point, in my calendar, I have booked a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for an hour every day, an extra drop-in. That's the link. I'll email it out. And anyone who has last-minute panic or has some very simple question or anything like that, it's an opportunity to do that, and to kind of drop into the Zoom call and ask. You know, they can spill over the hour if it's really, really cramped, but I'm just putting it down for an hour because we'll see how demand goes. Tuesday, I have a student immediately after, so I wouldn't necessarily be able to extend. Okay, so this document, maybe I'll just attach this document in an email to everyone. Okay, so that's for next week, because next week all your lectures stop, all your practicals stop. This is essentially the last week of your teaching. But because of the IT disruption and lockdown and stress and just generally things being quite difficult for you, I think it's only fair that I stick this in. I'm not inviting Manny, Peter, or Achenna to do this. They covered the practical this morning and I couldn't make it to because I was writing your exam. Next week I'll send out some questions and advice on what to revise, but I'll do that after the coursework. So can you not hear me? Okay, right. I'm going to just be doing this on my own, right? And the only other thing to be said is that Manny and Peter will be staffing the Discord server. So you can contact them anytime as well for that. So keep that in mind as well. That's not 11 to 12, that's them just keeping an eye on. No, yes, we don't have any session tomorrow because we've done all our learning catalytics, and I really don't want to hang around for the 4 o'clock and 3 and it's just if you suddenly are now starting your coursework, which there are a small percentage of people who are just coming to it, with just over a week left to do it, I think you probably want at least a weekend just to get your head around it. That's a good question, Mark. Okay, so Mark asks, when will we find out about our learning catalytic grades? Well, Matthew and I, now learning catalytics and sheets, now learning catalytics and worksheets are almost in. Let me also answer a question which is related to that about worksheets, deadlines. Hang on, let me stick that in as well. Worksheets and learning catalytics. Okay, so Matthew and I are going to what I think I'm going to say to Matthew is that because of the IT disruption, because of the license disruption in the last 2 weeks, several of you weren't able to get into the call last week, and we had 2 sessions in 1 week. So what I'm going to say to Matthew is that we need to remove a higher percentage of ones of lower grade. Does that make sense? So if you did 10, let's just say, hypothetically you did 10, Matthew was intending to say only assess 8. I might push him to assess only 7, okay? Or we'll see what the figures are, just so it kind of works to your benefit. I think he's inclined to go that way as well anyway. Worksheets, the same logic applies as well with worksheets. Lots of students have done their Java worksheets, interestingly enough, and some are still trying to and get them marked. If you are trying to get worksheets marked, use a drop-in next week. I mean, that's it, the deadline has passed, but you know, as long as next week isn't hectic, then come along to one of these sessions and I will mark as many of your worksheets left over. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it, given the fact your coursework will probably be the biggest stress point at this moment. But if you've done them and they're just sitting there, then feel free to drop in. Okay, so worksheets, again, Jack, we are going to recalculate and recalibrate, because I noticed that there are lots of students who did their Java who had massive gaps in their Python. And I'm not sure why, but well, we'll have a chat. But the basic logic of those percentage points is to, you know, say you did, I don't know, 10 hypothetically worksheets. Matthew originally was going to say do 8. We'll probably discuss that, maybe make it 7 as a proportion, if that makes sense. That's only a rough figure, because actually I don't honestly know how many you've done. Right, okay, so that support next week, those details for this extra drop-in. What's the best way of getting it to you? Should I put it in an email? Or shall I pop it a Moodle? Do you like going to Moodle, or just an email, or what? What would be better? Anyone suggest where you're more likely to look? Both. Okay, yeah, me being dumb boy, that's probably the sensible response. Okay, I'm gonna make a note. I'll do Moodle and email. What I'll do is I'll email this document. Okay, right. Okay, so next question, or a series of questions that have arisen, are the tech report. What kind of format, what kind of style, what kind of approach, etc. to it that should you do in order to get the best possible grade you can without making it really difficult and complicated and all the rest of it. Okay, so I was thinking about this a lot. What I'll do is I'd like to answer the same question for the video as well. Is it fine that you make cuts so it's short to the point? Hang on, can I do it? Yes, you can, Aaron. Is it fine if you make cuts so it's short to the point? I don't know. Oh, I see what you mean. Your video, you mean? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with the video, because that's easier, right? And then we'll come back and discuss this. Yeah. Sorry, I'm with you, Remy. Danny, just give me a second to come back to the tech report, because it doesn't need to be a source of anxiety. And I'll try to explain. Remember, because I'm teaching it, the rule I give to you will be the rule I will say to Manny, Uchenna, and Peter, we are sticking by. Okay, so if they differ or make a different judgment, and I've said to you explicitly something, then we need to make sure that we as a team are consistent with what I'm saying to you. For the video, and add that in the post. Tom, you could do that. Okay, so let's just talk about the video, format, style, and approach. What's the easiest way of doing the video? Right, okay, well, I think the easiest way, honestly, is to open up your screen and then get the coursework, right? So here's the coursework. And the way the coursework is built is that, let's scroll down, is that each of the tasks basically gives you something to demonstrate, right? Now, okay, would you demonstrate your console helper? That's first task. Maybe not, that can go in the tech report, or you might just start off saying, here's my tech report, here's my main, right? So you could pop those two things and say, that kind of covers those two tasks. Then you come to this one here, which is this question. You see this little screen, this little sort of screen dump from my console when I was doing this. Whatever you did for this task. So I would say, okay, I'm going to demonstrate what I did for task 4. Here we go. And then what will happen is that if you use the task sequence as a way of demonstrating your video, it really helps us say, yeah, that's all there, give them 5, yeah, that's all there, etc. And then you get your maximum points. And it struck me as the simplest way to do it. So I would be more than happy if you say, okay, I'm going to demonstrate what I did for task 4. Because the issue for you might be this, right? You aren't going to do all however many tasks there are. I should know how many coding tasks there are. 12 coding tasks. You might only get one to pass this, right? There's a question we're going to come to soon. So you may only do the first 4, right? And if you add up these marks, which I'll come to, you'll find that will give you comfortably enough plus a tech group. But that doesn't mean that you'll be down marked. Okay, is the video to demonstrate that each task works or to demonstrate it and show the code? No, it's to demonstrate that it works. And they're both very good questions, Nick and Danny. So Nick and Danny have both asked, should you show your code as well? Can you hear my dog grumbling in the background? Can you stop it, animal? Thank you. Right. Yeah, that's exactly what she's doing, Kobe. Right, it's because the neighbor's dogs are out. It was the wind. Yeah, it was my tummy. I'm just hungry. Anyway, all right. Thank you, Minnie. Stop. Right, distracting. Okay, so the question was, what should you put in your video? Okay, the official line is this. It should just demonstrate the functionality, i.e. you should just go through the console. But I'll give you my honest view, and this is what I'll say to the other 3 markers. I did the same technique in a second year module when I got students to build their own mobile app to demonstrate it. And those students who just on their own, it's 5 marks for doing the task. Ready? And we'll come back to the 5 marks and the way that this thing's going to add up, okay? How it's going to work. It's a question of how well you've done it, I suppose. 5 marks for each task will be how clearly. So for example, Kobe just asks, is it 5 marks for finishing that task? Well, let's just say that you have 2 prompts, right? And you just, the first word is rooms and the second prompt is plugs. Yeah, so that's exactly the point, Nick, I was getting to. So although this is what I haven't officially said, what really worked really well was when students were demonstrating it, and then they just flicked back to the code and said, this is the bit of code I'm executing. And so what it did is it helped us. Remember, this is all for us to assess you as fairly as possible. It made it so easy for me to mark, right? Yeah, it is. Hang on. Can you take the dog out, Sophia? Thanks. Okay. Daughter back from school. Right, Shed Butler. Yeah, Shed Butler has not been called on at the moment. It isn't a lot of time, Joseph, for the video. And actually, yeah, so let's just have a look. So in the video, execute it to show how it works. Don't show all your code, because you've got to think the tech report should really be that place where you focus on bits of your code. And actually, strictly, we should look at your code. Part of our assessment process will be to look at your code, right? So what you're trying to do in your video is really demonstrate it. But if you feel that the demonstration is better if you're able to flick not every single instance to the code, and you very briefly make a few comments, then feel free to do it, okay? But from the assessment point of view, this is what we've got to do. We've got to look at your code, right? We've got to watch a video and your tech report in order to give you a fair judgment. So Kobe asked the question about, if I want to get 5 marks, why would I get 4 marks or 3 marks, etc., rather than, let's just say that's you're building constructors and member variables. Remember, there's a back-end element to this. So when we assess you, part of the marks will be how your user interface behaves. But let's say that it looks really good and it looks just like that. But then we look at your code and you haven't even got constructors and you haven't even built classes, right? And you've kind of done it all in the main and it's just all over the place. Then clearly you wouldn't get the 5 marks. Remember, look at the back-end detail here. That's what we have to look at for the code. So don't get too hung up about flicking it back and forth. I think getting it into 3 minutes and then showing the code is going to be a huge struggle. I would say the official line, stick to the official line. Sometimes you might find if you've done a snazzy bit of code and that you're really pleased with it, you want to just point to it, right? And that might be really helpful if you've done something interesting. But I would rely on us to look at the code, right? Yes, so in that the video, we should mainly demonstrate that it works, and in the tech report, we go into detail on how it works. Yeah, that's a good way, but I want to make the tech report slightly simpler than that, okay? But that's pretty much the gist of it is right, yeah? So this is you showing it to us. Should you be justifying variable names in the report? No. I think as long as you have, okay, because think about how I've gone about this term. I have given you, I taught you with what was it? Camel case, right? But I discussed this with Matthew, and Matthew and I both came to the agreement that as long as we're consistent with you, or you're consistent internally with your variable naming process, then it doesn't really matter. You might want to say, if you don't use camel case, what variable naming convention do you use, but you don't have to justify variable names. And Tom will come to that, because that's a tech report question, okay? From my point of view, the last thing I want to do is look for fault. And I'm going to discourage the other three from looking for fault. I think what I'm going to try to look is to see, yes, here's it's demonstrated. Let's give the appropriate marks. Let's have a look at the code, and let's look at the code against the constraints and give the most generous possible mark. I expect people who've put the work into it will find they'll get really good grades. People who haven't been able to put as much work should be reasonably straightforward. It's a first year module, remember, and it's not here to kind of punish you or put a downer on you, etc. Anyway, so I've kind of gone off a bit, as you probably know. I tend to do that. So, you know, if I'm demonstrating it, I would demonstrate that, right? Then I'd say, okay, so that's how I do it. Now, this is a question that has come up. Some of you have said, I've kind of done this slightly differently. Now, the risk here is if you haven't specified the rooms and the plugs and you've worked on it differently, you're not going to be down marked instantly. If it doesn't match the tasks by task, the question is, have you built a constructor and the relevant data member variables in the back end? And is your system going to be properly explained in your tech report? And that's sufficient, as long as it's not overcomplicated and completely crazy. I mean, that's an extreme example. So, you know, basically for the majority of you, if you want an easy life and you want to get through this reasonably comfortably, stick to the task structure as a logical sequence. So if you think about it, part one is 20%, right? When using for loops is using calling the variable and I and j okay. When did Python uses just the variables to make what is doing clearer? If all your variable is doing in your loop is, it's all right. Another daughter has just arrived, looking for the dog. When using the loops, is calling the variable I and j okay. When we did Python, I suggested to you to change the variable names to make it what is going clearer. Okay, I think if it's a for I loop, you know, int I equals 0, I is less than the length, etc., etc. If the context of the loop is really clear and you know, it's working as an index, right? That's typically what most of the loops will be doing, working as some kind of index to help you manage it. It's not really a big deal. I's and J's are very common. You certainly don't want to use lengthy words, because that just makes your code ridiculously complicated. Okay, so I don't want to go off on a tangent too much, other than answer your questions, because otherwise this will get into a jumble. So that's my suggestion for the video format. Use the task sequence as a guide to your video sequence. Now, the advantage is obviously it's easier. It's easier for us to understand what's going on with your video and what you've done, and it'll be easier for us to assess you. I mean, it's going to be tricky to assess. I tried to make it simpler, but I ended up making it simpler to do than maybe to assess. But anyway, that's not your problem. But look at the way that let's move on to the next question, which is about the tech report. And in the background of the tech report is this question of how to pass. That's a question that's come up quite a few times, right? And it probably will come up a few more times. Will you lose marks if you haven't done all the tasks and your report is smaller than 1,000 words? Okay, good question. Will you lose marks if you haven't done all the tasks? Of course you will, because the tasks represent their own mark. So if you haven't done task 12, you can't have the marks for task 12, right? I think that's part of your question. But the other half of the question is, your report is smaller than 1,000 words. This is the bit I need to focus on. 1,000 words plus or minus 10%. Okay, it is actually really quite easy to get up to that word count, because I'm going to explain how to do it. right? If you've only done 4 tasks inside your, let's say that you've gone just to pass it, right? Now, let's see if we can just think this thing through so you can understand what my logic is. That 20 marks is 20%. So if you do all of part 1, which is tasks 4 and 5 and 6, right? So there's 3 tasks in there, that's worth 20%. If you then do your video, which is worth 10%, that takes you to roughly 30%. Remember, you may not get the full 20 depending on the, or if you know, things go wrong with it. So you might want to push it to about 50% to make sure you hit the 40% pass mark, right? But the tech report then is 10%. So is the 10% based on 1,000 words and a calculation on the words? No, not in the slightest. In fact, I'm going to explain to you the logic of how we're going to read your tech report. So the 1,000 words is, if you like, an upper limit, right? If it falls down to about 700 words, that in itself, and say you only do the first part, you only do 20%, or you do part 1 here, right? So you want to pass it, and you want to try to write it up as best as you can. Let's have a look. Will that be enough to pass it? What's this very first one? 5 marks. Yeah, theoretically, that will get you right to the pass criteria. Right, where was I? I'm going all over the place. Chord, there we go. Right. So how will the tech report? So for the task, hang on, Kobe's just written, for the report, I just wrote the task numbers down in a table on the left and wrote how I solved the problem on the right. That's a nice way of doing it. Okay. Okay, that's a really nice way. In fact, that's going to synchronize quite nicely with what I'm going to suggest. Right, so let's come to the tech report. The 2 parts that it should have, one should be the constraints table, right? So what you're basically trying to do is you grab the constraints table or some variation of the constraints table, which is here, which is here, right? There it is, right? You would probably copy that. You might copy that into it, but this column would be your own. And then in here, you would basically give some kind of general explanation of how you split your code up. This is a place where you would say, yeah, my backend objects are smart home, blah, 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 blah. I have a smart home, which is the only interface to my front end, and there are no system out statements. You know, if you explicitly state that here, you are supporting the grading process for us to get you a good grade, because we will take it on trust. You're not lying, obviously, right? So this constraint, you can have 0, 1, many there. What you might want to do with this constraint is because there's some interesting conversations about how the room and plug should be coded together, and several really interesting variations. And the first time I think I heard it was a couple of weeks ago. And I think this is a good place for you to say something like, with the way that I've set it up, you know, this is how it will work, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in an essay style format. That's a really good question, Christian. Absolutely right. So what I'm suggesting is that constraints table, I'm waffling a bit, apologize. And then you go through this column and you just comment on each of those, what you've done in your code, how your code roughly fits, right? Feel comfortable here just to write freely, right, under each of these constraints. Obviously, Java, not much to say. Let's find one that you might want to make a few comments on the use of string builder or scanner. How often did you use it? Did you have a clever way of creating one scanner object and passing it around, or did you create it inside a each of the methods you needed it? In this coursework, what's really critical is that I don't want you to feel that if you don't follow a strict rule book, that you know, the point of this coursework was to give you some flexibility. Yeah, passing one scanner is quite it's an alternative way of doing it. All I want to see is your thinking process, and it's rational and it makes sense. It's not ludicrous, it's not overcomplicated, it's not overthinking it. These notes here, this course, I will email this, I think I'll email this out and post it onto the FAQ. Yeah, Mateus, that's a really good question. I would also suggest using screenshots from your code. Absolutely. But let's just come to that section in a second, because it sounds like you think Kobe and Danny have been doing something that I was going to suggest anyway. So here, this is a really interesting one, right? Complexity how do you know objectively that your code is not overcomplicated or it's undercomplicated or whatever? But you won't necessarily know that because you need at least several other points of view and other things to help you. But what you can write here is your own idea of what overcomplicated means. So if you're looking at 1,000 words and you're thinking, how am I going to justify 1,000 words? All right, so let's have a look at this bit here. Okay, I'm going to say what I think overcomplicate. I'm going to translate this into my terms. My understanding of overcomplicated is that if I use for some of you, it might be that using unnecessary extra functions, you might interpret it. Some of you might use it in terms of different types of, structures. I don't know, whatever you have done. And whatever mechanism and idea that you've had about keeping the complexity clear, because this is not entirely objective. There's an element of experience and subjectivity when it comes to complexity. There are clearly given cases where the code is overcomplicated. It's often tied to people trying to future protect their code. They're thinking, okay, in the future, you might want to develop X, Y, and Z. Right now, that is a double-edged sword. If you've written code in this coursework like that, I generally don't have a problem with it because that's quite a good practice, but it can trip you up. You can never always know how the future of the development of that code will be, right? That's why I wrote in the core, if you are going to write code, here's the trick. If you are going to write code where you sort of want to future protect it, right? So you write some methods which might be more general, or you might introduce an extra class, for example, to manage some other element of it. And you think, how can I justify that? Okay, let's go back to the scenario and see how this is going to be developed from the top little paragraph. I spent some time trying to make it as realistic as possible. Then use that to base and justify my decision on. If you just say, because I like it, because I like coding like this, you somewhere along the line, you will lose marks, right? That it's not down to, should never just come down to subjective opinion. Anyway, right, so there's a table, that's part one, right? And the second thing that you would do is you would use, I would say, just as Kobe and Danny have said, is use the tasks. But instead of calling them tasks, call them steps. Right? Just say, and the steps work like this, right? Can we say we did something because the lecturer said? Yeah, that's funny. No, not really. Mainly because if you were writing that in your final year project, you'd have to find some independent source. There has to be a reason that lecturer said to do it. There has to be an independent reason that if you took the lecturer out of the picture, it was still a good reason. That you can say, you can put the reason out, that even if the lecturer supported you or supplied you with the reason and you like that reason, you think, okay, that's how I'm going to do it. The fact that a lecturer, I mean, when I'm supervising final year projects, and that's the analogy we're thinking about here, right? Me doing this with you. When I'm supervising them, I get really, really involved with projects, with students, encourage them to write it well, think it really well. You can never guarantee a first for a project, but I do get I see it as a massive learning opportunity, right? So I often suggest tons of stuff, but I ask the student to take, if they like what they hear, independently. Okay, if our report and video aren't perfect, but our code works well, how much will our mark suffer? That's a very, very good question. It depends what you mean by perfect. I mean, it's an unreasonable standard perfect. So let me come to that, right? Let me just try to tidy this up and come to William's question about how much will your mark suffer? Okay, let me hold that thought, make a note of that. Marking. Right, okay, so use the tasks, use them as steps, but this is how I would actually write it. When you're looking at a basic way of writing or communication in a technical subject like ours, you pretty much have this pattern. You define a problem, and then you define your approach to it in the most crudest possible way, which kind of leads you to your solution. Right now, I'm really distilling this and simplifying this, but essentially, let me just that tab. So what do I mean? So what I mean is this, right? Let's take an example so I can explain how you might, hang on. Let's say, but good to meet most marks in the marking criteria. Honestly, I had this conversation with someone earlier. Stefan just asked, let's say not perfect. Okay, perfection in university is a curse. Can I just say that out loud? James, I would cringe and run out of the room. I don't think anyone would say a world-renowned expert on crazy, obscure stuff. Yeah, definitely, but maybe not. Okay, so perfection, can I just say, because I had this conversation with at least a handful of students in the last few years about understanding everything, writing it to 100%, etc., etc. It is a curse to approach your university study in that way. If you want a first class honor degree, right, and you want to aspire to a first class honor degree, you need to aspire to getting 70 or above, and that's it. No one will say that person got 72 and that person got 83. Oh, that first isn't as big as that first and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't work like that. So whatever school, college, previous study, whatever idea you've had, you've got to drop it. You've got to drop an idea that there's a perfect model, and you've got to look to make sure that you hit 70 plus. That's all. Once you hit 70 plus, you're in the first class category. You know, in the first year, you might think, oh, Nadi's just, you know, I'll prove him wrong. I can write things to 100%. Let me give you a really good example. In the first year, I had a fantastic student. He is still a fantastic student. Let me not say anything bad about him, who got 98% in one assessment in the first year. It could have been for the architecture module or something. Anyway, that's right. Yes. Yeah. Nick was a 70% student. Did I tell you that? Or did he tell you that? Because that's what he told me. And we talked because I worked with his wife. Yeah, because I worked with Eleni, and she's also one of the support staff. And she, as a colleague, is really diligent. But she drove herself round the bend with the amount of extra time and effort she put. And she knows it's almost like it's an unnecessary extreme. So the question is, right, so when Nick talking about him and his wife, Nick was 70% and his wife was 80%. They both have first. It's not that one is better. Stefan, that's absolutely right. You will never, no one will ever say you got 71% in all your modules. That person got 89%. They're a better student than you. No one ever, ever will care to ask that question. And what happens as you go through your first year and your second year, right, is that this first year student who got 98% on a fluke, because first year, you know, it's easier to do. In the second year, it got close to 40%. And the reason he got 40% is because the perfection thing just broke him. If he couldn't get the top grade, he didn't know how to function with a slightly, you know, a 70. He wanted a 90. And so what I'm saying to you is 70 plus is where you need to aspire. Don't go into some kind of place which encourages you to think I've got to always get 80% plus. You know, I have a first class honor degree in philosophy. I couldn't tell you what I got for each module. I don't really care. Compromise where you can. Absolutely, Tom. Be strategic in your study. Be strategic in your effort. Get your first. That the best students at university aren't the ones who burn themselves out, having to learn everything, having to study everything, having to hit 100%. The best ones who are strategic and tactical and understand that, okay, this is what I need for 70%. That's not a big deal if I don't, you know, 75% just to be on the comfortable side. We have a huge, huge thing. In fact, if I tell you this, you probably have this already. Rich's team, so Rich, Matt, and Jack have published a tool which allows you to calculate your grade. I don't know if they've told you about it yet or you've heard about it, but it's around. I have final year students who only need to pass their final year project because their second year average was a first. So in the final year, they only need to get a 2-1 and they'll still come out with a first. Cool. Yes. Please use, that's excellent. Use that. Be intelligent about your study. Don't, you know, you prove nothing to yourself by forcing it to be 100%. Right, now why am I saying this to you? Okay, I'll tell you why. We'll come back to the tech report. We'll finish up with the tech report. And let me just come back to why I'm saying that to you, because some of you are trying to think, how do I pass it or how do I get a first? Okay, Lewis, you have to bear with me a second. Grade so far for this module, Matthew will collate, right? And he pulls a various different, I'll come back to that question. If you just remind me if I don't answer that in a minute. So how would you write it? This is the absolute best way. This is a distillation of not just my teaching, but also all the research I've done in philosophy, theory of language, etc., right? Tons of it. But this is my distillation for you. When you communicate, the best communication writing form is you always define the problem and you define what the problem is. So let's apply that to an example for the coursework. So look at the coursework. Let's just randomly pick a task, right? So you're trying to talk about this task here, right? The Python coursework mark is in your email. I email Matt to get my, but I think it will release properly soon. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point, Tom. Right. So if I look at task 7, I say it says design and build a method to allow all smart plugs to be switched off. So straight away, you've got a problem. How do I do it? How should it work? So you're looking at a problem, right? That's how you should communicate. You should understand what you're going to write in your tech report. You're going to say for task 7, right? The problem I understood it was this. Now I'd already coded, this is the kind of thing you might find yourself writing. I'd already coded, so I had one array here, one array there, one array inside another, and I had methods which managed that. So the challenge for me was how would I get this mechanism to work? Is it simple? Was it complicated? So what you're doing is you're defining the problem in your writing, and then you say, so my decision to how I was going to code it would be to do this because it fits nicely with the overall strategy I've taken. Or my approach was to do this because at this stage, it was fairly flexible how I could code it. And I might realize when I get to task 9, I might return. But now that I've finished, I can say that I've stuck to the same strategy. If you communicate like that, you are basically hitting 100% for a tech report. For me, that's the absolute best way of communicating. Define the problem, explain why it's a problem, right? What the problem is as you see it from your coding point of view. And the problem for you can be, it looks so damn complicated, I don't even know where to start. So that's a problem, right? And you can write that. So then you talk about your method or approach to how you might have broken it apart. Now, those who are thinking about just being able to pass the coursework, this is a really simple way of writing a decent amount, but also getting the best tech report grade easily, right? But that's the other extreme. You just go overboard. So Danny, let me just finish my point and come back to yours. So if I'm looking to pass it, right, you've got to literally say, this is a challenge because I have no idea whether I should write it like this, write it like that, etc. So you would put that on paper. And then you say, I could code it with this, code it's not clear. Then so my first approach is to do this. And the reason I'm doing this is because of this, right? So what you're doing is you're giving the problem and you're giving your reasoning process and the decision, the justification for how you decided to code it. Notice what I'm saying. I'm not saying I want a description of your code at this stage or what you coded, but why you coded it or approached it in that way. Now that's different. That can cut your word count down if you need it to, or if you want your word count to expand, you add in some description. So Danny, this trick here is if you want to keep your word count down, but still write it well, don't put descriptive content in. Put thinking processes in, right? Of the issue, how you tackle the problem, what you defined as the problem, and your decisions that you made, right? That doesn't mean that you have to describe all the code you have on your paper in your system. What I will do when I read it is I'll say, wow, that person really thought that thing through. It's my responsibility to have a look at how they actually coded it. Or you could do a screen dump, like an image. That won't add your word count and put it in. So this was my solution at the end of that section. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's okay to directly mention in the text. Absolutely, Adriana, that's a good strategy. So what I'm trying to teach you, and I know that this might be a little bit, much, is that when the degree should teach you to communicate clearly and sharply and appropriately. It's really fundamental. So this problem reasoning method of communication is one that works in working life. I know as a software engineer how many times I had to use it and why actually it made me better at my job. although I might not have been the best coder in the company, I was one of the best communicators. So I could sit with my company boss and in a huge meeting and talk and justify our approaches. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's being recorded. So what I'm saying to you is that to become excellent at your university study, it is not description in your written code. So don't get hung up about just dumping in every piece of code in there. We can see your code, right? It's using that strategy, that thinking process, and displaying that. When you get to work, you will be grateful if you learn this one piece, because one of the very first things that might happen to you is your boss says, I want you to write this. And you say, what do you want me to write? Okay, I'll have a go. And you come back and you write something and they say, well, why did you write it like that? Hang on a sec, Robert. And you say, oh, I just thought it was the right way to do it. Big X mark against your name. They'll think, okay, this person's fairly low down. If they can't justify or reason out their process and communicate that, I'm not impressed. So what we need to teach at university is how to improve your written and your communication skills. And it's as simple as I've said. Problem, how you understand the problem and your decision and how you've approached it, they make the most profound difference to how well you write and how well you'll be graded. Certainly for this assessment, and this is exactly what I'm going to tell Manny, Uchenna, and Peter. I say the rule will be this. If they justify their code, we don't want to see tons of code in there, and you can get inside there. There's thinking demonstrated on the paper, how they identify the problem. Whether we agree with the approach or not is irrelevant. What we're looking for is their thinking process. Then mark them as best as you can, right? Okay, so Robert's quickly got a quick question. In the zip file, do we need to copy the IntelliJ program folder? I would. Yeah, I would just, Robert, the question for us is that how easy is it, you going to make it for us to open up your code? That's all. And that's all we really need to be concerned about, really, how easy it is. We would only have to run your code if you don't supply a demonstration, or your demonstration is terrible, or your tech report is missing, right? Then we'd have to run it to give it a fair chance. And that's already working against the student, because that's already, you've lost those points, right? Okay, so that's what I would say about the communication, the writing of the tech report. Don't get lost in every detail, every variable name, as we kind of hinted at earlier. Don't worry about that. What I want to know is what your strategy is, what your thinking process is. And what I want you to try to develop and trust is that you have one, right? The fact you've got to university means that whatever form of study you've done before has brought you to university. That means that you already have the ingredients there to just grow with it. It doesn't mean that you are completely unable to do this, right? You could probably find in your own life a place where you can be so extremely rational about decision making. That's the skill that I'm talking about, and that's the communication skill. That's what we need to do. Right, so that's the tech report. Now, I had a question in the middle of that, and I'm kind of, it's going on longer than I wanted to. Let's just talk, excuse me, let's just talk very briefly about how to pass. How to pass, hang on. Have I got another question? No, how to pass. Okay, so this isn't relevant for everyone because some of you are going for the first. Well, let's combine the two things, shall we? Let's talk about how to pass and how to get a first, right? If we use code from week 7, do we need to reference it in the report? That's a really good question. I'm assuming, given everything I've said, that if you've used week 7, you can make just a single sentence. I've used this based on legacy code supplied to me. I've deliberately given you week 7 code for you to adapt. So there's absolutely no problem with it. So how would I go for a first? Right, what I would do is I would say, okay, let's start with the first and let's then talk about passing it. First of all, I would say, okay, it's 20% for the technical report. And so theoretically, I've got 80% relying on grade that I need to get if I want to. But if that's giving me 20 and to get a first, I only need to get, say, 75%, then I only need to get 50% or 60% at most off the code, and that will do me, right? Literally, crazy as this sounds, literally go through each task and add up. It says marks, but these are percentage points because everything adds up to 100. So it says 5% for that, 5% for that. The question you might have is, okay, let's just say that, you know, it's this question of perfection or error or whatever, right? So let's say that I can get the majority of them. I get 3 out of that, 3 out of that, make a reasonable stab at it, right? 3 out of that, 2/3 of all of that. You'll find you'll get to, I don't know, you may not even need to do, if I'm being honest with you, if you look at the system level options, they're worth 15%. I think if you do your calculations right, that's 85 to 100, right? That means that you've already got a first, even if you don't touch this task. So that's worth bearing in mind. You prove nothing. You prove absolutely nothing if you're going to burn yourself out in the process of it. However, if you're a confident coder, then go for it. But if you want to first and you're new to programming and you're just getting into it and you want to do your best, but you know there are some challenges in this, then remember 70+% is what you're aiming for. Okay, that's at the top end. At the pass end, right? How do you do that? Well, look, you've already got 5% for a console helper, 5% for your dashboard. That's 10%, right? So that's 10. Another 5 for just getting the constructors built and then coded in the front end, right? So you can literally add up the points. As you add up the marks, if you want to pass comfortably, make your code add up. So the code and the tech report and the a video tolerably go around 50%, and that should put you comfortably into a pass. You'll find it isn't much. I think there are a couple of students this week, and I suspect next week with these drop-ins that I'm offering, people will come and say, I just need to pass. I just want to pass. You know, I've had a hard time. Okay, yeah, let me answer your question in a second, Danny. So next week, I won't be surprised if people come to me and say, I just need to pass. You know, I have had a terrible time with the Java, and can you just give me some guidance? If you are in that situation, don't feel bad about it, right? Just simply come and see me and we'll talk through, right? But if you are just trying to pass, as Laz has just said, take week 7 material, just do this. It's so simple. Take week 7, right? Download it. Let me answer. Download it, build it as roughly as possible, right? With the dashboard and all the rest of it, even if it doesn't fully work, because you have to change it a bit, right? Change the smart light switch to smart plug and change the smart building to smart home. You've probably got 20% of your coursework already built just by doing that single act. So if you are thinking, how do I start? How do I go at it? Do that. That's what week 7 was there for. Right, anyway, next question. First, Danny's, sorry, quick question. In the video demo, do we need to speak or just a screen recording? It's a very good question. Honestly, in this case, I would say just add subtitles just to indicate what you're testing. If you do a silent screen recording, you might make your audience struggle a little bit to see what you're actually testing. They may not be able to spot where your cursor's going and stuff like that. So you might want to say, if you don't want to speak, pop a subtitle in. That's absolutely right. Yes, for Stefan, but let me just come to that. So you don't strictly need to speak. You could even do Microsoft SAMs. It's not like the core computing, right? Where I really did want to, you know, some kind of narration. Here you need to just indicate which task it is you're doing and what you're testing. Because remember that you want to make it as easy for us to follow you as possible. So if you just do the screen recording and you add subtitles, testing task 4, selecting option 1, right? As a little thing. And I think YouTube, if you upload it to YouTube and you want to add in titles, I think you can. I think that's straightforward, or lots of software does. Right. Can I ask an unrelated question? If we do quite well in all modules, but happen to hypothetically fail, when do you repeat that module? That's an excellent question. That's slightly complicated by the fact that that question is subject to this. If it's a 20 credit module, and if you do get 39%, incidentally, what Stefan said is right. Okay. If it's a 20 credit module, you get reset opportunities, I believe, if it's over 30%. If you fail above 30% and all the rest of it's okay, you get the opportunity to reset, right? And I'll just come back to a question. I won't try to answer this fully because actually, Ala, the best person is Matthew. Matthew's our associate head for court, and he knows all the rules inside out. He chairs all the meetings. But the gist, as I understand it, is that the only difficulty you have is programming is 40 credits. And if you fail programming, you do get resit opportunity in the summer. And that resit is a timed exam, is what we did last year. And it was based on the Java coursework from last year. Okay, it's not great. I mean, he said that statistically, when students fail that, they often aren't heavily motivated to pass the resit. But generally speaking, the rule is a 20 credit module. If you fail it within a certain margin, you get to resit it. If you fail it, so you got 2% in it, right? Then I think the rules change. But what I would do is I would actually email Matthew that question and he will lay those answers out for you properly. Right, okay. I know we're sort of running out of time. In the video, could we put screenshots of the code on the screen side by side with the demo? Yeah, that's a great idea, William. If I demo all 12 tasks, I'm struggling to fit it into 3 minutes. Okay, should I cut any of that? If you've done all 12 tasks, right, I'm hoping that there are at least, you know, a decent percentage of you comfortable to do all 12. Then if it goes slightly longer than 3 minutes because you want to do it, what I would do is maybe what I wouldn't bother with, Adam, is, you know, if you look at the logic of the tasks, so if I just show you the house options, right, switches everything off and switches everything on, then you come to the room level options, they get all switched on and switch all of them off. What you might do is you say, I'm using this method to switch off and switch on. You pass it a parameter. I don't know how you've coded it, right? But this may be a faster way to demonstrate it. And then what you can say is, instead of showing you for the house level options, I'm just going to show you one example of it working. Doing the most complicated one, which would be an individual plug or a room level. So you don't have to demonstrate the house level. Right. So if we're struggling with both the week 7 worksheets and the coursework, should we try to finish the week sheets, try to get a better understanding, and then go head first in the course? Should we go straight to the course? Okay. So yeah. Okay. So yes, Charlie, we'll stop in a minute and we can chat in a sec. So to answer Mark's question, if you're struggling with week 7 worksheets in the coursework, do week 7, follow that video, build week 7, download the code I actually put on Moodle, somewhere on Moodle. Someone asked me, and I dropped it into there, wherever it is there. That project used in live lecture, right? Now this is going to sound, remember, I've tried to make this easy to pass. So download that, right? Follow through those 2 things, watch one of the videos and just skip through it. It's got tons of code in both of those, composition 1 and composition 2. It's got tons of code in there, but actually the very first one tries to explain it. Build it as best as you can and then pop into a drop-in next week, Mark, right? Once you've done that, because the very first thing I'll say to you is, okay, so come to the Monday drop-in and I'll chat with you. Or in the meantime, go and contact Shah. She might have time between now and then to be able to help you. But that's why I've put on these extra drop-ins so I can help in that situation. Right, I've got a few more questions. I hope that's okay. That makes sense. Danny, week 7 is pretty much half the coursework. Yeah, I'm sure someone's going to tell me off for doing that. Right, is it too late to get the worksheets marked, Nadim? No, Dan, it's not. Next week, I'm leaving open for people to come to the drop-in, but please remember that the priority for next week is for coursework related questions. If you have worksheets, I'll obviously let the hours spill over and get your worksheets marked as best as I can, right? Okay, Mark, yeah, so you do that. Contact Shah independently now, see when she's free next week, okay? I think our hour is almost up. I feel like I've talked. Ping from Manny, Nad spoken, the video should be longer than, no longer. Yeah, in fact, he asked me that question earlier and he said in his email, if they're 4 minutes is going to be a pain. Okay, so I try to give him an upper limit, but what I should have emailed him is that actually a really well put together video. It's not a struggle. at all, it is not an exhausting, you don't want to make the video an exhausting experience by having to go through everything, right? Yeah. Okay. So it can be around 3.5 minutes. And if I will say to the others, if you've done 12 tasks, but you make everything in your video, I'm going to show you this one, show you that one, show you that one, that might be painful. That will, as I don't know, it was Danny who said it, or someone who just said it a bit further, it might make it really long. So use how you've coded it to help simplify how you're demonstrating it. Because if you've got a single method which switches all your things on or off, right, and you pass it parameters, for example, you can just demonstrate that once. So you could do it as a house level, as a room level. The code is deliberately written, so there's that opportunity in the way that you've coded it. I hope I'm not giving too many late-minute hints for coding. Okay, we kind of have run our hour. So there's nothing tomorrow. I'll email out. But next week, just to emphasize, and I will drop this into the thing, 11 to 12 every day with that link. Come and pop in. Yeah, and here's another thing. That's okay, Stefan. What I would also say is feel free to help each other. Yes, it will be. It'll go under the FAQ under the date with the link to this sheet, and I'll email both as well. What I was going to say was feel free to help each other, right? Yeah, I won't go away straight away. So those who want a quick chat at the end, we'll have a chat. What was I going to say? Oh, I'm distracted now. Feel free to help each other. But as people have been saying to me this week, you can help someone, but you don't give them their code. Okay, just don't do that. I've given you so much that really they should just help you get started with week 7 and nudge you in the right direction. It's not that difficult to pass. I didn't deliberately wrote it to try to make that easy. You know, we have a brilliant cybersecurity student who struggled. He understood everything in the coding. He said to me, Nad, I get what you do, blah, 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 but when I code, I just can't get my head around it. But he was such a good student and everything else. So we kind of helped him as best as we can, because it shouldn't be an obstacle in that way, because he so clearly does get it. And so my point to you is that we don't want people to suffer unnecessarily. If you don't get it, none of it makes sense, or you're not studying, that's a different case. But if you get it and you're struggling and all the rest of it, that's a different case. Anyway, I'll shut up. Okay. Natalie, I would encourage you to just add a little 30 seconds to your video. Don't worry about it. You know, I mean, that 2 to 3 minute limit is just so people don't do 10-minute videos, if I'm being honest with you. But last year I marked almost 400 courseworks by myself, and this year I've got help, so I think we'll be okay, right? So, you know, just don't get carried away. Okay, but I'm not going to go. I'm going to stop sharing and stop the recording.